Solazzo, CMO at Appfire, whose tools are used by 55% of the Fortune 500 companies. So, what do most companies get fundamentally wrong about marketing to technical buyers?
This desire to build a persona. The photo, you have what do they like to do in their free time? Where do they get their information? Unless you've truly been in a dev team, the traditional CRO still think about marketing as the team that book the event and show up with the donuts. That could not be further from the truth. We are running full agile as marketers. We have squads, 2-week sprints. We are using our own tool set.
Are channels converging and diverging as we see?
I think it's completely disrupted our comfort in the funnel. It's chaotic now.
What skills that are irreplaceable?
Marketing is moving from generalist. We really need specialists. We've gotten ahead of ourselves in the AI space. Headlines, for example, SaaS is dead. Show me how that's possible.
Welcome to CXO Spotlight. I'm your show host, Chirag Kanijo. And today's guest is Solazzo, CMO at Appfire, whose tools are used by 55% of the Fortune 500 companies. She has spent over 20 years in marketing to technical buyers, developer programs at IBM, 3 years in Japan, led marketing through massive TD SYNNEX merger, and built a revenue engine from scratch at Syntax across 5 acquisitions. Now she's doing it again at Appfire, a company with no direct sales team, over 1 million users, and 700 plus channel partners as the only go-to-market option, which is amazing. She has figured out something most marketing leaders haven't figured out about the technical buyers. And that's what we are here to talk about. Welcome, Catherine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So, Catherine, first thing first, you have one of the most unusual paths to CMO I've come across. You ran the developer program at IBM. And I said, Japan to this merger and acquisition phase. Most CMOs didn't take that route, right? So how would you describe this journey and what your role is now?
Absolutely unique, I would say, and probably not replicable if I had to try and do it again. I think it's the product of some great mentorship. I think it's the product of saying yes to new opportunities. And some of the best advice I got early in my career was that the best kind of executive, senior executive, has experience across the business. And if you truly want to lead a P&L in your career, being able to understand, not just, metaphorically put yourself in the shoes of another leader, but actually perform those different functions, it makes you a better leader all around. So I credit certainly having been at IBM in a executive development program as a huge springboard for me very early in my career, which really helped me to get both what I would call horizontal and vertical experiences. And it's absolutely shaped my thinking, my approach, my skill set. And I couldn't be more appreciative for the investment.
Awesome. Yeah. And beautiful story. And there's a reason why I asked this, because we went hunting, we were looking for somebody who has spent a lot of time with the technical buyers. I want a lot of our audience to understand how understanding your buyers matters so much, and you just cannot apply the same rules everywhere. And every company you have been at, the buyer has been technical. Developers at IBM, I think value-added resellers at TD SYNNEX, and MSP at Syntax. Now, enterprise development teams and their leaders at Appfire. So what do most companies get fundamentally wrong about marketing to technical buyers?
I think there is this desire to build a persona. We've seen them, right? You have the photo, you have what do they like to do in their free time? Where do they get their information? All of those things. Unless you've truly been in a dev team, as an example, unless you've actually used the tools that those teams use, it's very hard to understand the personality, the mindset, the things that are going to resonate with this audience. And for me, I remember when I had the assignment at IBM to, move to California, immerse myself in that cohort, to roll out developer programs for that community. I was doing a lot of work with startups, with students who were exploring non-formal degrees in development and coding and all of these things. And it's a completely different profile of person. And, that role, if you would have looked at it on my resume, would have made absolutely no sense at all at that time. Now, fast forward to my current role, where at Appfire, we're the leading partner in the Atlassian ecosystem to extend and enhance through apps the value you get from the platforms that you're already running in your business, right? And what spoke to me about this role in particular was when I was in that development, developer focused role, our whole team shifted to work in Jira, to work in an agile framework. And I had to study about Scrum and stories and epics and all of these things that I would never use in marketing. But we adopted it because it was important for us to understand our audience. Well, fast forward now to where I am with my team. We are running full agile in my organization as marketers. We have squads, we have 2-week sprints. We are using not only the Atlassian tool set, but our own tool set, being our own best use case. And it helps us live and breathe what it is we're trying to communicate to the end buyer. And it's a completely different experience trying to develop materials for that audience when you are seeing and engaging in the tools and understanding the gaps and feeding that back to product and trying to figure out the best positioning of this against another tool set. It's like the best social experiment you could ever do as a marketing group. So hugely important to really get into the details.
I don't know how cool is this or people realize what you just said is that you as a CMO are marketing and building a revenue engine that is facing developers, but you are running squads just the way developers run and your systems into Jira so that your whole team gets to get the developer experience. So just know their day in the life, which is unbelievable, right? I think that's a great one. But curious, is that getting harder or easier to do? Like as a CMO's overall role, is it getting harder or easier with sort of AI changing how people discover and evaluate tools today?
For sure. Before this call, I just came off of a call with my digital team that was doing some best practice presentations and talking a lot about how do we keep our finger on SEO, but really invest in AIO and our LL recommendation engines, and how do we leverage even our technical content to be indexed and all of these things. So the answer is yeah. I mean, we're neck deep in this now, trying to develop a strategy, but also remain agile enough that as it's changing, which it is every day, that we're able to keep up. And when you're in an ecosystem like us, the other challenging thing is dominating, ranking, right, in a particular area becomes even more difficult when you are a partner within a same ecosystem of products, right?
Mhm.
And so how do you stick out? How are you finding ways to rise above the noise that's happening out there? So there's a lot of different things we're experimenting with now to make sure that we are leveraging both the technology side of things, but also just the human behavior side of things, which sometimes AI is not going to give you. You need the combination of effort between, sort of that human enhanced, AI. So the team is doing a lot right now to understand not only our audience, but our audience in the context of AI and how that's changing, how they are leveraging tools for like vibe coding as an example. Like, how do we get in that experience for them, and show up as a trusted source? So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but
Yeah,
spending a lot of time.
and it makes sense to me because if I have to think about Appfire and dev tools, right? Sometime back, it would have been so much about the Git repos or going to Stack Overflow and, sort of finding those things or G2 and other things like that, right? But now suddenly I definitely see people whenever they have a gap, let's say in Atlassian or Jira, they would now go to an LLM and say, hey, can you quickly look up
Mhm.
if there is something for this gap and everything. And many of these LLMs are I think, sort of sourcing more from Reddits and places like that. So suddenly that strategy becomes very important. So I can almost, when you were talking, could see that exactly my behavior has changed. So it has a lot of people when they look for tools and everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I think of it like if I use an analogy, and I don't know what your listener base is here in terms of age, but when you wanted to find like a synonym for something, right? You go to the thesaurus, right, and look up, okay, well, these are the
Yeah.
other ways you could do it, right? But now I go straight to Chat GPT to say, give me another way to say this. It is so much more rich in terms of the return of information. That's what we're seeing now. So people are shortcutting the way that they used to go discover information and find what they need. And that's where we need to show up. So
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Let's move a little bit into a very interesting area that other CMOs and leaders will find very interesting, which is budget. And no other function has been impacted more than marketing overall. Gartner just reported marketing budget have been flatlined to something like 7.7% of the revenue. I also read almost 60% of CMOs say that they don't have enough budget. But you have said something counterintuitive, but very interesting, that if marketers position themselves as the growth function, not a cost center, then they don't lose this battle. Can you talk a little bit more and explain this a bit better?
absolutely. Especially in my guidance plan for the team this year, the thing that I did different than in prior years, I would have just said, here's how we're allocating our budget across routes, across mediums, across tactics, all of these things, right? Priority areas. This year, I gave them guidance about investment plus effort. And many of the things that we have to do now as marketers are 90% effort, 10% expense, or vice versa, right? So if I think about the lift we can get from doing intelligent work around our content, around our keywords, around our, backlinking, all of these things are hugely effort-based, but very low on the expense side. And I think getting the right mix now speaks to the board. It speaks to your CFO on, how can we think differently about how we're going to approach our work, where it doesn't always mean I need more and more money. And I think that also builds confidence when it comes to investment, that they understand you've done the work to get to the leanest amount of financial investment possible. So when you go back and you need to ask for something specific, you can. But I remember, my early tenure as an executive, it was always about, did I feel defeat when my budget came out and it was lower than last year? Or did I feel empowered to find another way? And I 10 times out of 10, I felt defeated. Like we weren't important. We weren't an investment area. I have a very different mindset about that now. I think the more talent and in-house resource that you can have on your team, the better. Certainly shifting away from areas like paying additional fees for multiple agencies. You just have to get smarter about the way that you invest your people talent and your dollars. So that mix for me is changing very much, especially this year.
Yeah, especially from the consulting and agency perspective, so many things becoming flattened by the AI as a layer, because now AI can empower your team to do the same things, right? That also sometimes brings the cost down. But I would kind of dig a little bit deeper in that, and I'm sure some of your strategies can help others in this. That how do you shift this belief of volume to sort of precision? When the pressure from leadership comes about more pipeline, more leads, and more activity, right? General inclination is that let's show a lot of work, let's show more content going out, right? Versus a level-headed CMO thinks about precision, that I could do better with precision, right? What's your sort of thought process about that?
I am very much in the same mindset. One of our key themes for this year is simplify, focus, execute. And in fact, we have a marketing council that sort of sits above our squad teams where we provide guidance and feedback on prioritization and things like that. We've gone through a huge, I would call it prioritized ranking for our portfolio in the context of what marketing services and the level of service each of those get when it comes to putting them through our demand gen engine. And for me, being able to do less with more investment behind it is always the way to go. It's easier on the team. It's easier to optimize, right? We're not always jumping from new tactic to new tactic. And it's the guidance I gave the team this week, right? Where they were themselves saying, well, and if we add this and add that, and I keep saying, let's go back to the basics and make sure that we get things in market that are strong, that have enough dollars behind them that they can be successful. And we allow ourselves enough time to pay attention to what the data is telling us, right? And I think there's always a push, especially from stakeholders who are requesting work, that they think they need more. And being able to communicate to those stakeholders about why more is not necessarily the best thing, but figure out ways to incorporate that into the campaign strategy or whatever it may be is a real skill. And I think in times where you have businesses who are struggling, I mean, you can see all of the layoff announcements in the tech industry. It's wild, right? Well, what they're doing is they're focusing, and that means that everyone has to do the same. It's easy to panic and say we need more, more, more. The hard thing is to find restraint and focus in on the things that truly matter. And that's what we're doing.
Super. One more question on the same topic. When you hear from so many stakeholders, right? You attend meeting, and I'm sure just like the best leaders I see, they have first listen only mode where you listen before
Mhm.
saying anything, right? Let's say you met most of your CMO, CRO, product officers, all the product leaders you met. You understood the portfolio where it's growing, which is the most critical. Like you said, you prioritize the right
Mhm.
portfolio and everything, right? Not just from which brings the most money, but also which is more growing and is the interest. I get that. Once you heard everything, you go back to stakeholders and you used a nice word that you need to communicate well, and that sets the expectation, right? Very curious, what does your first slide or opening looks like whenever you're trying to go about doing that?
So we actually just did this. We took an approach this year. The product team took a very interesting approach to their portfolio prioritization where they made public for the whole company their road mapping sessions. And we took a page out of their book. So when it came to us to communicate what we heard in that session and other sessions, the first slide was, here's what we heard from all of you. Here's what we heard from sales team. Here's what we heard from our partners. Here's what we heard from product. This is how we are going to approach those needs. Here are the frameworks we're going to use. Here are the investment models we're going to use. And I think what was appreciated about that was it took the mystery out of what is marketing doing over there? So many
Why are
times.
making these decisions, right? Very clear.
Exactly.
Because here's what we heard. This is brilliant. Yeah.
Exactly. And now we're staying true to keep them updated on, listen, what we told you is what is happening. Here's what's in market. Here are the dates, here's the content and materials. And just that transparency, I think, has done a lot. We've instead of us, haunting people for please send us customer stories, we launched a new program with great transparency, easy access, put in a ticket if you have one. We've seen amazing engagement from that because we took them on the journey with us, and we're not having to, pry things out of the hands of people to come support what we need to be successful in market. And it's a very different approach, I think, than sort of executing behind the curtain and, you know, hoping people just think we're, you know, brilliant and doing the right thing, we're actually using it as an opportunity for them to provide feedback as well. So different model.
So simple and so powerful. I even in relationships in normal day in the life, I feel a lot of times when we are spending energy to explain anything to anyone, we have this doubt that whether they got it or not.
Mhm.
Just by repeating the same thing and acknowledging and saying, here's what we heard, you just made that bridge possible that you were heard. And that's why we are making this decision, which is so good. Now, something cool, something a lot of people don't know about AppFire will surprise people is that you have no to zero sales team. 700 plus. Do you have?
We do. We do. We actually, one of our acquisitions from 2025 was the first entry point, Appfire Flow, into us expanding what I'll call our route to market approach. And, it's a very interesting part of the portfolio, but stretched us a lot in terms of how do we start to architect this
Mm,
part of our business, which has been very much channel focused in the past.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what I found fascinating that you have 700 plus channel partners and a million users.
Mhm.
And then you have all these Fortune 500 companies, over 50% of them use, AppFire's whole portfolio. So you are marketing a growth engine, which is unlike very others where it's very sales heavy and sales serving. It is very partner serving, in my opinion, right? So how does that change what your team actually does?
So we've spent a lot of time this year thinking about routes and route contribution and the approach and where do we need more of a hybrid model. So we're absolutely looking at that. For us, a very PLG focused engagement has certainly helped us quite a bit. Now, if we think about how do we, shift the center of gravity where so many customers are using our tools and platforms, but they're being purchased either via the marketplace or through partners, imagine what we can do with our brand recognition and our focus on getting closer to the customer with our partners. That is absolutely the trajectory that we're on and the team and I are on this year. We have, again, if you look at our history, I mean, I think it's like 25 acquisitions, right? And so the brand identity piece of it has to be out in front leading. So a lot of what we're doing now is how do we leverage the great work that our partners do and support them with a demand gen engine, where a lot of those smaller partners may not have the capability or the capacity or the time and talent to be able to execute those things and really have a joint go to market. So I'm working on that with the team now and exploring other ways. There has to always be a mix. It's not a one size fits all, right? I think as marketers, we know there's certain parts of our portfolio that lend themselves to one experience or the other. And for us, we have some amazing hero products that in many cases sell themselves. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping up that traffic, that interest, that recommendation engine by our users to really allow people to transact directly on the marketplace. So it's a very complex go to market, which I love because it's very challenging. And I find that the possibility now of having a set of products to supplement that route that we've worked so successfully in with our partners before is even more exciting for me.
Yeah, two questions come to my mind, which are very curious and probably applicable in your situation only. Is that you have a technical buyer, right? And the technical buyer almost always has a gap and they're struggling and they immediately need to find to cover that gap with the whole environment, right? And today their day in their life, as you mentioned, is a little bit different. They can go to an AI platform or anywhere, right? Does that make you think that the marketplace barriers will have to break? Because suddenly you can buy something from ChatGPT, you can buy something from within Copilot or Claude. That means the marketplace barriers. Why I'm asking you this because you are CMO plus, you
Mm,
also oversee revenue part of it, not
mhm,
just the servicing the sales. You yourself have the view over revenue. So you really have to think deeply that, hey, one is our channels earlier in the go to market, but our channels converging and diverging as we see this happening. Any thoughts on that?
I think the possibilities for what this technology is going to do to fulfillment channels, to discovery channels, all through the buyer's journey, is interesting. I think it's completely disrupted our comfort in the funnel, right? That it's like it's chaotic now, it's all over the place. And the truth is, do I care where the revenue's coming from as long as the revenue's coming? Or not really. I'm okay.
Mm.
It's more about being prepared and ready for when that shift happens. And I think that is the part that is very unpredictable right now, and why we have to remain flexible as marketers, because it's not enough for us to just have great content anymore. We really, the strategic part of our role has to be watching where the market's going, follow the sun in terms of how our buyers, their behaviors are changing. And it's very much more science than it is art at this point. And I think that's why you see a lot of CMOs like myself investing heavily in technology and their tech stack, and continuing to look ahead at what's next. Like, who is the next great tool or platform out there to support us? I can tell you that the conversations I'm having now around tools and platforms are completely different than 2 years ago, and it's hard to keep up, right? And in the past, where you would go to those larger, well established providers within the tech stack community, we're having to take more chances on some of these smaller technology companies that are emerging, because they can move faster than some of the larger ones. So it's a very interesting time staying current on what's even available out there.
Yeah, I'll be very, very curious to see the dwell time change of tech buyer, because as we start spending time more with AI or other platforms, right? That's the whole game, in my opinion, that if the dwell time changed, then we would want to move wherever the customer is. It channel doesn't matter. If they're sitting and spending more time, 2 hours, not on LinkedIn, but on ChatGPT, but
Mhm.
on another platform within Jira, when they go out and search somewhere else, suddenly the whole focus changes. So very, very curious. Yeah, we'll have to watch this space.
Mhm.
All right, so we've talked about budget cuts, technical buyers, and the noise that we are seeing. Let's look talk about some of the other stakeholders around you, not just CMO per se. There are CTOs, chief product officers, chief revenue officer watching this, who work alongside a CMO, right?
Mhm.
What does a CMO actually need from them that they're probably not getting today? We can use this forum to have more clarity and expectations.
Oh my. Well, I think let's talk about the tech piece of it, right? Where we just were, because I can tell you 20 plus years ago, if you told me I would be running the full tool and platform environment, not only for my team, but for much of our sales business, CRM, peripheral tools, all of that, I would have told you, are you insane? I have a music background, a communications background, right? But the truth is that before, when we used to have that CIO's office of managing things end to end for the company, is changing a lot. And the reason why is you need marketers to select and provide requirements and be the ones who truly know what we need. And we're not always getting that from the CIO's office anymore. And in many cases, I know I'm not alone out there. Many of my CMO peers are also assuming responsibility for their own tech stack. And it doesn't mean that the security on top of it, the compliance around it, all of the data structure needed is still not owned and managed elsewhere in the company. But I do think the shift has been significant, because our needs are not the traditional needs of sort of the legacy, CIO organization. So I think that's changing, right? And to keep up with that is hard. And I think our team does a really fantastic job at Appfire teaming with us to make sure that we are really the business decision maker, and they are there to help and support the evolving needs of those tools and platforms. I think from, let's say the CRO function, the traditional CRO, not the modern CRO, may still think about marketing as, the team that's going to, book the event and show up with the donuts. And that could not be further from the truth. The honestly, the digital gymnastics, the data architecture needed, the proficiency in technology to execute our jobs, I think is not as known or not as appreciated as and how complex it is to execute these jobs. And so when, we get requests for things that to us feel like they don't align to how we've modernized, I know the teams feel very frustrated by that. Part of that is we have to be better advocates for how we can contribute, as you said, as a revenue generating function, where some of those lower value activities we've completely carved out of where we spend our time. And I think that's a hard adjustment for, for teams, right, who relied on the traditional marketer for, doing some of that support.
Absolutely. Not many CMOs would have spoken it this candidly as you did. So I really appreciate that. But I have something positive that I'm observing because I sit with CIOs a lot of time. I sit with CTOs and chief product officers, and I think they get it. I think it took time, but they get it. I'll tell you two interesting patterns I'm noticing, which was needed and is happening. I think for a long time, a lot of people hoped CMO would understand that it is about revenue generation. It is not just about noise and, going through the motions. And we wish they get it's all about sales and revenue, right? I think that has completely happened. The eyes have been wide open in last few years. Same thing I felt that CIOs felt that marketing needs to come to my home and understand how technology, governance, security, PII, and things work. Which was very hard for marketers to do that. I want to be part of decision making, not the mechanics,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm going to use this. I think the CIO house has heard, and I see the CIOs and the C-suite leadership on the technical side spend way more time in the business side of the house to really live their day in the life, because they also hear that dissonance coming through that. So I love that two hop shifts has happened. One hop shift is the marketers understanding the revenue life, because that's the right direction. And I think another shift that has happened is that not marketers jumping into the CIO zone, but CIOs trying to understand marketers' word and bringing them closer to the technology decision making, especially when MarTech is like the stack that you want to run over, right? Yeah.
I agree. And I also think that the maturity of that, that leap, as you said, also varies greatly based on the size of business that you're a part of, right? And I think some of that, mid-tier to smaller companies is lagging just in general, right? But I think you're right, sort of that larger enterprise to enterprise, the risk is higher if they don't shift. So I think it's a spectrum for sure. It's not one or the other, but I agree with you. And by the way, I've partnered with some incredible CIOs, incredible CROs. My statement is more generic overall. So we're all trying. We're all being challenged, right, to change significantly every day. It's hard.
Yeah, yeah. All it does is it candidly lays down the North Star that we are working towards, right? And that's I think what's important. All right, let's talk a little bit about, we spoke very little, but talk something more specific about your role in AI. So, AI, it's like a tale of two cities or two worlds, right? Quite paradoxical. AI has made it easier than ever to produce content, and everybody can write, posts, white papers, whatnot, right? But you are marketing to technical buyers, and they're drowning in content being thrown at them, right? How should a lot of companies who kind of market to the technical buyer and there's a huge industry. It's $1 trillion industry that markets to them. How would you think about differentiating and positioning to them? Like, what's your North Star that guides you?
I think at the end of the day, understanding what drives those audiences, right? Like writing the next great line of code or being recognized for launching an app that changes the world, right? Like that's sort of the level of motivation. And if you think about your marketing in that context and what your tool can help them do to achieve that community recognition, the where you show up and how you show up, I think is very different. And at the end of the day, yes, we're consumed by AI and this technology and whatever. The interesting thing about these audiences, these technical audiences, is they still really appreciate community. They're still super involved in word of mouth recommendation, finding out about the next hot thing before anybody else does, trying something, contributing something to open source communities, right? Like you have this very special and unique, personality set in there. And it's about just unlocking what drives them. And, so our investments are definitely shifting, right? Where things like reviews, it's the same as me. I go on Amazon and I'm sorry if that doesn't have, 1,300 stars, I'm skipping right over it. So we're investing in making champions of our users. We're investing in using platforms like G2 to position our product sets and our community events to directly engage, with those users in different markets. So in truth, I think some of the old school tactics still work. And I think we can't throw them in the garbage. Like we do have to figure out that, people are still people at the end of the day. And we have to keep our finger on that pulse as well. So it's changing. I think, you also have to understand the fear that comes from some of those personas where all of this technology is swirling, and are they going to become obsolete? And messaging to some of that innate fear and feeling within each of those roles is also really important, right? And if you're positioning yourself as a way to replace and this and that, you're not going to get a lot of eyeballs on that, maybe from the finance leaders, but certainly not from your users of technology. And it's an evolving area. It's hard. All of us, regardless if you're in a technical role or a non-technical role, the amount of pure content we have to consume and make sense of on a daily basis is becoming impossible.
Yeah, and has the general purpose AI helped in this, or no? They're not able to help, like Chat GPT or things like that.
I believe when it is user-led, the activity is user-led versus, let's say, vendor-led, I think that it is more valuable. So if I am actively going out and seeking something and it pops up, it is a lot more easy to receive and engage with than if I am, throwing a pop-up at you with a paid ad. So again, I think it's about understanding the temperament, the ability to absorb right from the user experience. And we have a lot of things I think to adjust going forward.
Yeah, very, very cool. I think this is the area that I'm very passionate about. I really, through these conversations as well, and my own job as well, job role as well of building an I found something very interesting that resonates with what you just said, right? About the user understanding of user. You sort of said behavior, like where are they going now? And you also spoke about the fears and the tensions and the wishes they have. It's very hard, I found, this Chat GPT or Claude of the world. They are general purpose, so they understand general audience. When you have a technical audience, you have to understand what are their pain, fear, priorities, trends, things like that. And if the content is created with that intelligence, right, in mind, that's where it starts connecting, because it is speaking their language, right? That's where our team started building it, that hey, we need to build a purpose built for tech buyers, and build the intelligence layer, build the whole brand component and everything. And it was genuinely out of my own problem. I am leading marketing and sales and I'm asking something, and the answer is coming back is like, I'm looking at it like, that's nobody will ever, that's not how CIO or a CTO, chief data officer talks like.
Mhm.
They don't wake up and say, things like these. They ask these nuanced questions. Give me something like that. So yeah, that connects really well for me.
Mhm.
Okay. AI aside, let's talk about humans, right? You have been very vocal about human first in the AI world. I think almost 39 or 40% of CMOs I heard are cutting the headcount, right? For a lot of marketing professionals that are watching, not just the C-suite and everybody, right? In your peers and people who aspire to work for people like you, what skills would you recommend for them that are irreplaceable? Because you are in that power of authority and you can help them foresee where they should go.
Yes, you want to hope that all roles are irreplaceable, but at the end of the day, I think, some of the more specialized areas that, again, I think marketing overall is moving from more of a generalist, a sort of role-based capability to we really need specialists in very particular areas, especially in this space, right? I think a lot of CMOs, and this happens in our CMO chat all the time, do you in-house or outsource? And I think that is a key, area of disagreement. For me, I believe that the more specialization I can have in-house, the better. I can get more out of an individual than I can with associated costs for an agency, as an example. So areas where I am personally insourcing is definitely in the space we just talked about. Really building out an LLM strategy, really understanding AEO, like how do we approach it? Because you can't just know the expertise, you need to know Appfire. And I think that is something that you lose when you don't have that talent in-house. So certainly some of those areas for sure. I look at my team and I have everything from product marketing to technical writers to traditional content, design, web, demand gen, all of these things. And again, I look for the areas that we need to invest in is the way we approach the customer experience for sure. Spending a lot now. I just had someone new join our team to focus on our, surveying, our CSAT, our NPS. Like it cuts across the whole organization. So roles that are not only supporting marketing, but are supporting my peers in product for close feedback loops, supporting our sales team for, hey, you need to pay attention. This customer may be not looking like they're going to stay with us, right? Like where I can get value across the business from roles, that is absolutely where I'm investing. I can see that the same in our platforms team, where those teams are running our systems of record for the business with our CRM and how are we forecasting on where we're going to be. All of that work again provides value to not just me but my peers as well. And I think advice I would give to anyone who is performing in their role, the more you can position yourself in that way where you are providing cross-organizational, cross-functional value, those are the roles that become irreplaceable.
Would you also say, so one thing for sure I understood and I heard is that a lot of people who want to stay in marketing, want to grow in marketing, an important thing would be to hear from the technology side and be experienced in customer experience and NPS and things like that. Fantastic. Other than that, should they learn any AI skills? Should they learn any revenue skills? What would you say about that?
Absolutely. One, if you cannot attach your role to revenue in some way, it's a very hard conversation to have. And again, we want to be a revenue engine for the company, not a cost center. And so, yes, and I think AI skills are extremely important, right? I think that being able to not just learn the tools, but understand the use cases and the application of those tools is even more important, right? That that is where I see the difference between people who are good at their job and great at their job because they are using it in the context of the business that they're in. So are they able to say, I'm going to use this tool and this technology to work faster, to do more, to, right? That is the kind of advice I would give people, which is understand your craft to an extent that you can bring forward to your leadership and say, I'm going to apply this knowledge and this technology in a way that is going to benefit us, right? I think that's the key.
Wonderful. Yeah. Last two questions, and generally it's these are sort of my favorite ones. One is where I just open the floor and I ask that, Appfire is going middle of another transformation with the AI and everything going on, right? What excites you the most for next 2 years? But before that, you have to answer one thing. Just as a CMO, what worries you the most about the overall state of the industry and where we're going? And sort of, I want to end it on a positive note where I want to know what sort of excites you the most.
Yeah. Worries me. I think we've gotten ahead of ourselves in the AI space, and I think there's a lot of headlines out there that aren't necessarily validated. For example, software is dead, SaaS is dead. Show me how that's possible right now. Show me how that's possible. So I think we've overhyped some things before we've really understood the the time period, the time horizon of when and how these things will happen. And oh, by the way, there's still going to be a lot of foundational need in this space. So I think that it's surely gotten eyeballs on articles, but I think if you listen and watch all of the great leaders of these portfolio companies, they completely disagree. So that worries me that the hype around that or the narrative around that, people won't take the time to really understand, what's underneath that and the truth around it. What excites me is every day is new in this job. And for me, again, I learn something every day from my team, from my peers. This is a role that I will never be bored and or comfortable, right? And so for me to be able to be in a function within the business that can be pushing the organization overall is a really cool place to be. And I think especially in the area that I'm in with technology, that's really important because we are all looking for how to do something differently, how to approach problems differently. And I really believe that the marketing function is at many times more intimately close with the behavior of the customer. And I think the rest of the company is looking to us for a lot of those insights. So that makes me excited is that we are needed, we're earning the respect, and just excited to see what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. I think this is very valuable. One thing I did think when you were saying was so right and very apt about the topic that we were talking about is that all this hype are read at the headline level and opinions are made about it. And the whole topic was technical buyer. I think nobody cares to understand the technical buyers need to rely on their foundational stuff and the
Absolutely.
longevity with that. How
Mhm.
hard is it to change the things you have at your home? Imagine how hard it is to change the things where your entire ERP, CRM,
Absolutely.
and pipeline is living. It's not like, oh, just because there is a AI for that, I'm going to rip and replace everything. So I was smiling because I understand the technical buyer is not thinking like, I read a news and let's change it.
Yes.
But I think I really appreciate your time and candidness, and also some very specific nuggets that you dropped about the skills as well as the relationship between the stakeholders. I wish you and Appfire the best, and thank you so much for your time and being on the show.
No, thank you.